I know you've got an ear out for the start of the podcast, but before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to remind you to keep an eye out for Darrell Lee's limited edition Christmas treats, because they're in stores now. Like the iconic Christmas nougat pudding, so yummy and a gorgeous little gift. And some delicious Chrissy-themed twists on your favourite treats, like the Darrell Lee Rockley Road with chewy red and green jelly pieces, green and red crunchy milk chocolate balls, my favourites, and green apple and strawberry flavoured licorice. Watch them disappear. Your Christmas treats table will pop with colour and scrumptiousness. Spread some joy, bring the fun, and enjoy the Christmas tradition that is Darrell Lee. Hurry before they sell out. Darrell Lee makes Christmas better. Welcome to The Five of My Life with me, Nigel Marsh. As an author, adman and theologian, I've always been interested in people's stories. Not just those with a high profile, but people from all walks of life, regardless of fame. Which is why I created this show. Each guest who takes the Five of My Life challenge chooses a favourite film, book, song, place and possession. They tell me their choices in advance so I can research them, but they don't tell me why they've chosen them. That's the subject of our conversation. It's amazing what you can learn when discussing someone's 5 choices. I hope you enjoy listening to the show as much as I enjoy making it. David Caesar is a multi-awarded television and film director and writer. As evidenced by his prolific output, David is an accomplished storyteller, making this discussion of his 5 a real pleasure. David, welcome to Five of My Life.
Lovely to be here.
Have you listened to any other episodes?
I've listened to quite a few now, and I've enjoyed them very much.
And any particular stories or guests stand out?
Oh, well, the one with Rob was really interesting, and there was another one with a nurse who
Mary
had a
Chiarella.
very interesting story, and a few I've dipped my toe in.
Well, listen, thank you for listening, mate. This is all about you, your choices and your stories.
Okay.
And we start always with the film choice of our guests.
Yeah.
And oh my Lord, you chose All That Jazz, 1979. I adored watching that again, but tell me why you chose it and your story behind it.
Well, I was just this bogan country boy growing up in the country in the late 70s, and I had a very good and supportive art teacher, a very camp gay guy, Mr. McClelland. He was a lovely chap and he was very supportive, but I wasn't really sure where I fit into that world in terms of doing stuff like that at school. And I used to go out, and there used to be a cinema in town, the wonderful Maruya Fiesta, and whatever films were on there we used to go to see. And there was this run of films in the late 70s. I was like 14, 15 or so. So there's this run of films in the late 70s, and there was Apocalypse Now, and there was Gallipoli, I think, and then I remember seeing All That Jazz, and I went, oh, I really want to do that. And especially, I just remember there was the musical number in All That Jazz where I think it's I Think I'm Gonna Die, I'm not sure what it's called because it's a riff on an existing song. And I just was watching it, and it goes for like 10 minutes. And these women in these suits with veins all over them, and it's kind of, I'm just like, my jaw hit the floor, and I went, I want to do that. I don't know how I do that. I want to do that. I just want to do that. And it was just this turning point in my life. And I remember, I think I was 15, and I applied to film school, and like, because I didn't know anything, I thought, well, there's a film school in Sydney, and I'll go there. And I applied there, and they said, you're a little bit young, David. Usually you don't take people younger than 22. And I went, okay. So I just applied every single year. And so for the next 5 years, I kept applying. And eventually they said, okay, we'll just let you in. Okay, just stop applying. Just come on.
I love the fact that a film could have that dramatic an effect on a human's life journey. So it literally, it's not you saw lots of it. It goes, that film, and you go, do you know what? I've seen what I want to do.
Well, most of the films I'd seen had been war movies with my dad. And I enjoyed them, and they were what they were. But I didn't kind of notice, until that film, I didn't notice that someone had kind of made it. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of like people doing it and someone had recorded people doing it. And I just went, oh, they're making choices and the camera's doing that and there's editing and there's choreography and there's lighting and camera, and it blew my mind.
So the opening, probably 7 minutes, probably the best 7 minutes on film anywhere. Just when he's selecting the backing dancers with the opening song that everyone knows.
Yeah.
Absolutely sensational. There's number of things I'd love to chat to you about. The girlfriend story.
Yeah.
She was a knockout.
Wasn't she?
Erin Renkin. So the story that I didn't know until I researched it in your honour is, in real life, Bob Fosse, who directed it, who it's obviously based on, it's autobiographical, he was a root rat, and he had a wife and a mistress, and he was, screwing all the showgirls, blah, blah, blah. But his girlfriend at the time was the actress who plays the girlfriend in the film, and he made her audition.
To play herself.
Isn't that right? I've written a part, it's you, I'd like you to audition to be you.
It's fantastic.
The other thing it made me think, because I watched this 4 days ago now, you couldn't make that film now.
No.
The protagonist is someone who can't keep it in his pants. Woe is me, I can't decide between blah, blah, blah. Whereas now you go, well, why are you making a film about Harvey Weinstein? Whereas it sort of does age well at the same time as going, but you couldn't do that now. Whereas some films you go, it doesn't age well, that's a disaster. Now you go, oh, that is of another time.
It is, very much so.
In your early days, the rock and roll that Bob Fosse was obviously enjoying up his nose and whatever, did you have your wild years?
You know what? I never really did. I've always been a very stubborn bastard about things, and I remember, and there's a scene in Mullet, actually, one of my films, where it's like, I bought you a beer, mate. That was like a thing that used to happen a lot. I'm like, well, if I want to drink it, I'll decide. And there's this kind of, dare I say it, Australian thing about sort of mateship culture where you need to fit in. And I was always, for no real reason other than I'm just a stubborn bastard, I'd go, well, I'm not going to drink then. And so I just stopped drinking for a few years. Just because, and it was like that whole peer pressure thing, I would just I just dig my heels in about it. And also, I've never been that great with feeling out of control. It always makes me feel a little bit, nervous.
Yeah.
It's not that I didn't try drugs and stuff when I was younger, but it just never, I just went, I don't really like this.
I am stunned that you mentioned that particular scene in Mullet, because I'm not making this up, mate. I watched that 2 days ago, and the scene, if my wife or anyone would ask me what would you be the one that was most impactful, is that one, because I haven't had a drink for 20 years, and I had to endure, 3 or 4 years of morons going, just the one, go on, I bought it for you, you're no fun, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And the appalling, unloving, cruel peer pressure. It's like if you said to someone, go on, have inject yourself with this smack, go on, have some smack, you go, that's outrageous, you're going to kill that bloke's, that's terrible. It's not just Australian culture, it's the same in America and England, in my experience, is you get some morons who are supposed to be your friends, who don't care for you at all, and that scene was so well done. It was so well done. And Ben Mendelsohn, he was so beautiful in that film. He had a look about him, and in that scene particularly, you just think, God, he was sort of like James Deany, I thought.
Yeah, look, it's no secret I'm a huge fan of Ben. And when I was finishing film school, I got some money to make a short film. And Ben, who I think was 17 or 18, I got him to be in that back in, this is early 90s. I had no money, and he came up to Sydney and on the train, which is, like a long way to do this 8-minute long film for me. And we were very close for quite a long time. He started out with Kylie Minogue on a show when he was about 13. And so he had a huge history of that. And then he had issues, he had a different relationship to things to what I did as a late teen and early 20s. So, he's had a lot of life experience. It's quite amazing to see him take on the world.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, moving to your second choice on Five in My Life, and this is incredibly relevant to the whole point of this podcast. I'm not sure I'm that grateful that you chose it because I had to read the bloody thing. But you chose Story by Robert McGee. It is 500 pages long, but about the substance, structure, style and principle of screenwriting. I can probably guess why you chose it, but tell us why you chose it.
Well, the reason I read it was because a friend of mine used to work for the Sydney Morning Herald, and he said, would you interview this guy? And I go, I've never heard of him. And he go, oh, he does these seminars. And he's just published this book, and it's become like this thing. And I'd already made a few features and quite a few docos and quite a lot of television at that point. I was, I think, about 30 or something. Anyway, so I read it, and it was kind of this thing that I've always had this kind of testy relationship to the film industry, because in Australia in particular, there's this kind of weird, mystical thing with it. And everyone's looking for a new messiah who'll come along and be blessed with sort of innate talent, and they'll save us all and take us back to Khan, and I've kind of had this really weird relationship with that, because that's kind of not the world I grew up in. And I read this book and I went, oh, it's like a trade. It's like being a craftsperson, an artisan, and it kind of was like a relief for me, because I'd always felt uncomfortable with this idea of divine inspiration, and like the idea comes to you in a flash of light or a drug-induced stupor or whatever it is, and I just liked the idea that it was like you get on with it and you do the work. And you make it happen. And I went, I understand. I can see the place for me in the industry. And in a way, I kind of didn't before that. I always felt like on the outside of it. And so it was kind of like a turning point for me work-wise, that I just went, okay, I can just be like a tradie director. Like I'm a, high-vis, get behind the camera guy.
I'm loving your choices, mate, because they're so seminal in your life.
Yeah.
So all that jazz, that's what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And then the Story, that's how you do it. It's a craft. So me reading it, not being in your business, you go, wow, all the films he mentions and deconstructs, and about the protagonist's, narrative arc, the challenge, the resolution, the climate. You go, it's not a rattling page turner if you're not a filmmaker. Part of me reading it, and this is really unfair, was thinking, well, who the bloody hell are you? You're picking films that are good, that have already been made, and retrospectively and cleverly telling me why they're good. And I buy that, and now I understand a bit more about the narrative arc and X, Y, and Z. But what have you ever done? As in, I quite like, I don't know, Martin Scorsese to write this book or somebody. Anyway,
yeah,
so that's...
but I think that the thing about him is he's kind of the raconteur, and I think he was actually an actor for a while and did just sort of like character roles and stuff back in the 70s and 80s. There was a whole lot of other stuff going around. There's this whole thing called Joseph Campbell wrote this thing about the hero's myth, and it's like 7 novels, 7 volumes that are like 800 pages each, talking about myth and the shared myths around the globe, and it's incredibly hard work to go through. And I know that was inspiration for Star Wars and whatever this sort of structure. The thing about this book is like it was in a language I could get.
Yes.
I don't think he came up with anything new. I just think he kind of got these other ideas that were in the ether and then made it digestible for a bogan like me.
You're being self-deprecating, because I reckon, like with many things, I don't know, learning how to draw or play chess or whatever else, you go, learn the basics that you might not have realised were there, as in there is a craft, there is that. Learn it and then make it innate and then forget it and let your divine inspiration happen. Because if you... It's like, story by numbers might be a bit shit.
Oh, and I think that there's many a superhero movie that is that. Most movies exist in this formulaic world, but I think they probably always did to an extent, And I think that they were like, well, you need a happy ending, and you need this, and you need that, and you need that. So there was always some sort of formula. I think it's a bit too rigid now, but like I kind of wish I'd known it earlier, because one of the things I found interesting is I'd already made a film called Idiot Box, and I thought it was going to be really popular, but it was quite dark, and my structure was had a really big second act and a tiny third act, which was according to the history of filmmaking, it is problematic. And I can see that. I can look at the film and I can go, oh, that's how the experience is the film, because it just sort of stops. And I went, oh, I can see why that is a thing for people, that they want to have the climax and then there's a resolution after that, an emotional resolution. My film just comes up to Ben Mendelsohn getting, he gets shot. And, and that's the end. And there's no kind of afterthought or anything else or repercussions. And I can see why that's problematic.
Yeah, but at the same time, I like creative people like yourself being able to do stuff that doesn't fit in. I mean, my amateur opinion of Game of Thrones, which I'm not a fan of, almost the entire success, in my amateur humble opinion, is because they killed poor old Sean Bean. You go, hold on, that's not... I've watched this for a season, and he's the bloke, and you just killed him. Because they ripped the rules up. But again, a bit like Picasso, he could draw a woman without two... eyes on one side of her face, but he chose not to.
Look, absolutely, I agree with that. And the reality is that I think Game of Thrones was George R. R. Martin or whatever his name was that wrote it. He was a TV writer, and he consciously wrote a book that he thought would never get made because he broke all the rules.
Yeah.
He was very, very, apparently very consciously going, well, I'm going to write something that they'll never make because it breaks all the rules, because he had to abide by the rules of television in his day job.
Your third choice, which we add all the music to the 5 My Life Spotify playlist. It's just a sensational playlist because the algorithms would never do it. You've chosen the first track off ACD's second album.
It's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll.
Long Way to the Top. It triggers me because when I came to Australia, my kids were in the local primary school and they used to sing all the time. You probably know this. It's a long way to the shop for a sausage roll.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how I know it. But tell us why you chose it and your story behind it, mate.
Well, it's kind of this thing that's it's kind of bittersweet for me in a way. It's when I was growing up in Australia, and the 70s and 80s are probably the most seminal years for me. Australian culture was the biggest thing in Australia. There was this period, and I just thought as a kid, seeing Bon Scott with all this kind of attitude, and I knew kids at school like Bon Scott with that sort of cheeky grin and the attitude and the playfulness and the sass and all that was my world. And it was kind of like the movies, the biggest movies were Australian, the biggest novels, the plays, the music, everything was Australian. And then it's been weird that I didn't realise that kind of was non-existent before like 1970. And then it's been a sad thing for me to see the gradual decay of our engagement with Australianness. And it was just this weird thing on all these levels, like Australian-made cars suddenly were bad and like all this stuff just has gradually been taken away. And now there's this thing that people used to talk about that I wasn't aware of when I was a kid because we listened to Australian music and drove Australian cars and whatever. The idea of that chip on the shoulder about being Australian. And I teach 20-year-olds and stuff, and they know nothing about Australian cultural history. And they want to be storytellers and they want to be filmmakers, but they probably haven't seen almost anything made in Australia. And if you say, oh, this is really good, you go, oh, well, I think there's some really good Australian TV shows. They go, oh, well, tell me one. I give them 10, and they go, oh, I've never seen any of them. Well, so maybe you should watch them, and then you can decide whether they're any good. But there's this general thing, oh, if it's Australian, it's bad. And there's a particular music video of AC/DC on a truck going through Melbourne, and Bon Scott with the bagpipes, and my background's mostly Scottish as well. So I used to go to Presbyterian, like Sunday school, and they used to do stupid sword dances and bagpipes that get dragged out every now and then, which was very incongruous in an Australian summer on the coast where I grew up. This highland stuff. You know, and people in this sort of woolen tartan, sweating like pigs, playing bagpipe. It was very incongruous, but also kind of has a very Australian thing going on. But yeah, so I just remember really embracing the whole Bon Scott AC/DC thing. I hope it's been an ongoing influence in the tone of the work that I do, because it's something I'm very fond of, is that Australian cheekiness.
I'm loving your stories. The Australian voice, and that not be something that's less good or a lame version of. You go, an Australian voice done well is world class, just like a Belgian voice or a Canadian voice. We haven't all got to be pale imitations of Hollywood.
There's a reason why AC/DC became the biggest band in the world for a while in the early 80s. I mean, and that was mostly Malcolm and Angus Young, and they, you know, grew up in Ashfield, and, you know, and there's kind of this attitude in their music. I've been doing a lot of work about sort of colonial times in Australia, doing a lot of research because I'm quite fascinated by it. And there's so many things in Australian culture about rules and breaking rules and stuff that's so innate. And I think a lot of it goes back to convicts. But there was always an element right back to the First Fleet of being cheeky to the boss, you know, this weird tension between the rules and sort of like playing the game, you know. I find it really interesting, and I think people enjoy that.
There's a question I'd love to ask you about that video you mentioned. Do you know the budget for that?
Yeah, it was like $300 or $400.
$380. Hilarious. It's been seen by 45 million people.
Yeah.
It just makes me want to ask, in your career, have you got any stories of absurdly, stupidly small budgets that actually turned out to be the best success almost because you were only given half a bob?
Well, when I was at film school, and in third year, I ended up making this film called Shopping Town, and I went out with a camera and some secondhand film, and I filmed people's faces in a shopping centre in Parramatta. And then I recorded them. I just asked them one question. I said, what makes you happy? And then it's kind of this film where it's literally all the shots we had, we just filmed it, didn't really edit it. And I just went, this is what it is. I was obsessed about saying, I'm not trying to give you this grand message. I'm just saying this is, like I said, I've been quite interested in what is Australian. And so I put this out there in the world, and it was actually really successful, and it became this thing. I won all these awards at the Sydney Film Festival and the Adam Awards and all this stuff, and it won awards overseas, and I've got letters from people, and then it became a thing on the school curriculum. I don't know what they were doing with it, but it was part of the school curriculum for a while, and I'd get royalty checks for it, and it cost like a couple of $100. And part of that, though, I think it wasn't just a cynical exercise. It was very much, I was really interested in anthropology, like people like Ansel Adams and stuff in America, people who took anthropological images, and was quite obsessed by an American director of Westerns called John Ford. And someone said, well, you can't go and film in the Painted Valley anymore, and, you know, like that landscape is kind of what your films are about. And he says, no, the only landscape my films are about is the landscape of a person's face.
Well, I love it. So we're going deep. So I'm going to put my therapist's hat on. So this question that you ask all these people was, what makes you happy?
Yeah.
So, David Caesar, what makes you happy? Are you a happy chap generally?
Look, I think I'm a lot happier than I was. I used to think, and this was my arrogant young man thing, I used to think I could fix the world by making movies. I used to think that you could fix injustice and everything else by just putting a mirror on it. And I was quite arrogant about it and very confident in my ability to do that. But I was quite angry too, and I wasn't very happy. And even though people were actually allowing me to do it, and I guess part of that was there was an audience for it too, but still people let me do it. People weren't stopping me from doing it. But, you know, I was just ranting and raving, and, you know, like I just felt like I had some sort of like battle flag that I was charging through the world and saving everyone from themselves or something. And I realised that everything isn't as black and white as that. Everything is much more complicated, and people live in a constant state of grey. And it's kind of much harder to make sort of didactic statements about the world once you accept that the world and humans are complicated. But I think I'm happier in myself as a human being.
And what caused that change from angry young man to happier, grey, acknowledging person?
I think it was just about accepting the fact that I just think I would judge people a lot. And I think there was a point where I went, you know, if you look in the mirror, you're pretty ordinary. You know, you doing that is pretty ordinary. Even though kind of empirically that's true, what you've said, what you've attacked someone on at a dinner party. I had a reputation for going to dinner parties and being this sort of like 1920s Bolshevik speaker about class and
Who invited David?
Well, I think people thought it was amusing for a while, and then after a couple of years, people went, "Oh God!" And you know, and I honestly thought I was educating people, and I was just like, "Who did I think I was that I could do that?" And you know, like I would literally, the government would do something, and I'd stomp around and be really so angry about it. And there were things to be justified to be angry about. And now I just am very okay, yep, there they go again, more so now. And not feeling any burden to fix the world because, I mean, it was supremely arrogant to think I could as well. And it was like this thing, and I was at a point in my career where people going, you can make films that people really like. How about you just do that? And I'm going, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make films that change the world and fix everyone. I did the stint on Home and Away for a while, and in the middle of the pandemic, which was, I just found fantastic. And it was just this knowledge that there were 8 million people around the world watching this. And there were people who were locked up in tiny bedsits in Manchester and Sri Lanka and South America and all over the place watching this show, and then watching these people frolicking on a beach and gathering in groups and having sort of extended relationships with people and stuff. And it was kind of, you know, that's not fixing the world, but it's kind of like a thing that people get pleasure from, and it's a thing that gives people escape. And I just really liked knowing that I was helping make that, and that it was a thing, doing something in the world, not fixing it, but like a eating chocolate, you know, and that's a good thing.
And it goes back to your point about craft.
Yes.
You were making it as good as it could be. There's a wonderful story, an actress, I forget her name now, but she played the same role on an American daytime soap for 47 years. And you go, well, don't be so sniffy about it. She did it well. She wasn't pretending it was Shakespeare. We're not sniffy about a nurse or a fireman. She her day job was turning up and recording some idiotic script about her being divorced or her parents not being her parents, or I think she was killed 3 times in her career. But she turned up on time with a smile on her dial, did it well, knew her lines, and as you say, there were, whatever it was in America, 43 million people who watched it every week and loved it.
Yes.
And you go, good on you, love. Well done.
Look, it's a thing that I would regularly go, I think what we did with that scene was really good. And I think we found some moments that were really true between the characters. And I just sort of go, this is the craft of what I do. And I've made films, you know, with big American actors and big Australian actors and whatever else. And it is kind of not very different. I'm just so lucky to be able to do this. I just feel so privileged that I can keep doing it.
Well, there you go. You've answered the question, what makes you happy? We're going to move to your 4th choice, which is the far south coast of New South Wales. But I'm going to push you. Define it better for us.
Well, the far south coast, I mean, tragically, the easy way to define it is kind of where all those fires were.
Right.
About 2 years ago. And so many places down there. And Bega and Cabargo and Maruya and Browley and Mogo and all these places. And that's where I grew up. I was there until I was 19. And it was kind of like, looking back on it, that world was like, you just wouldn't believe it. You know, it was like literally going surfing in the morning. And seriously, I'm not exaggerating. We'll go surfing in the morning and then go up into the mountains and go skiing in the afternoon and then go to parties. And it was kind of like this surfy Aussie it was just incredible,
It
really.
sounds like heaven. Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I did. And my family life wasn't exactly heavenly, but my mother had issues. Anyway, and and often I would talk about my working class background, and it very much was working class. But when you're working class, I guess my brother-in-law's my age, and he's from Newcastle in England. His working class background in Newcastle, as they were closing
He
down,
wasn't surfing in the morning, mate.
closing down steel factories, and mine on going surfing at 6 o'clock in the morning in this kind of idyllic physical environment and beautiful world, and it just was it was so lucky, and it's something I just took for granted when I was growing up. I tried to sort of make a bit of a story about it with Mullet. Having a relationship to that world and taking it for granted, and then just going, I'm going off to the city to be a filmmaker, and I'm literally was where my head was at when I was 19, and not appreciating how wonderful it was.
It's just fabulous hearing you talk. Would you mind talking just a little bit about the family issues?
My mother always struggled with depression. I think this is a funny story. I remember my mum died a few years ago, and we were talking to my sister about it, and I was talking about going on holidays, like going to live with my grandparents in Wagga in Western New South Wales for 6 months. And she's going, "Are you mad? That wasn't a holiday." Mum couldn't cope. That was it. Mum couldn't cope. We were sent off to various relatives, and they would just put up with us until Mum thought she could cope with us, and then we go back. That was our life. And I just thought, it was great the way we went round to relatives in Melbourne and Sydney and Wagga and up in the mountains, the snowy mountains and stuff, and live with relatives and stuff, and for months at a time. And I'm thinking, this is just, isn't this what normal people do?
Yeah, yeah.
I had no other references for that. And here I am, 50 or whatever, and my sister's going, "Are you crazy? Can't you remember?" And I just thought, oh, okay, right. And everything around the house was, I don't know, she had sort of compulsive stuff going on and other issues as well. So you're always on tenterhooks whether you're going to upset her.
And where was Dad in all this?
Well, he's kind of a weirdo, my dad. He's kind of a hippie, and he's still around. And we used to grow all our own food, but he has a very bad relationship with authority, so he was often unemployed. But his relationship to that was, we grow our own food. We have our own water. We lived out in the bush. There were communes around where I lived, and my dad talked about the dirty hippies and stuff. And then in retrospect, it was like we grow our own food and then we preserve it. And I remember we used to get I had cousins who worked at a cheese factory, and we'd get all the offcuts, and we used to make butter, and we used to preserve all this stuff and cut up cows and put them in a freezer so we had meat, and we had chickens, and it was like this weird hippie. It was a very, I thought it was just normal. I mean, this is the weird thing. And I remember going to my cousins' places, when on our holidays, and I'd be going, turn the tap off, because we had water tanks, and it was always like water was really precious. And so I'd be lecturing them about how you should live. You can't waste that because you don't know when the next bit of food's coming from. And it was kind of all this stuff from home. Again, it was just what we thought was normal, I guess.
It makes me think about the first time I went to a friend's parents' house. And in my house, military, so sent away to boarding school, but at home, what was normal was pre-lunch, Mum and Dad would have a drink, and then they'd have a drink with lunch. And then when the sun went over the yard arm, because naval family, drink before dinner, drinks with dinner, and then drinks after dinner. Every day, 7 days a week. Went to a mate's house, the parents, waiting to be offered a drink and a meal with no alcohol. I just couldn't. When are they going to plonk the bottle of wine on the table? When am I going to be offered a beer? I just oh my God, that's how you live.
Yeah.
And to open the fridge, there's no booze in the fridge. There isn't a drinks cabinet. Oh, maybe it's just my family. Yeah.
Well, one of the big things for me was we had always had like a toilet, like a hole in the ground toilet. My dad had all these theories about human poo being the most nutritious thing in the world. So we had this toilet that used to get moved around the yard, and then I have to go out with him and dig it up, and then we plant vegetables in it. But when I used to go to people's houses with a flush toilet, I'd get really stressed about what the protocol of using it was.
Right.
And I didn't know what the brush was for.
Yeah.
And like if it didn't flush properly, I'd get in this panic and I'd just stand there for ages and keep flushing it for like, and if there was a stain on it, I didn't know what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the rules were because no one had ever shown me how to use it toilet, and we had this stinky thing out in this, literally a tin box that you'd get moved around the yard.
Wonderful. So your fifth choice,
Yes.
which is usually my favourite, but I don't know how you can top all these stories, but it is your garden spade is your possession on 5 of My Life. David Caesar, tell us why you've chosen that.
Well, I guess as part of my Zen older age, I found gardening to be really, I've always done it. One of the things when I was a kid and get sent to my grandmother's place, she was a very avid gardener, and so a lot of my time was with her gardening. And she was very into Japanese stuff, and she was a champion ikebana flower arranger, which was a Japanese thing, which is quite weird because my grandfather fought in the war against the Japanese. But anyway, and was very racist against Japanese people. But my grandmother was very into Japanese culture, which is very odd in Wagga Wagga. And so I'd garden with her, and she had this funny little nursery, and that was kind of, she used to run the nursery, and I used to water the plants with her, and anyway, do all that. And it's and the gardening at home and growing your own food has always kind of been part of it. And a few times I've tried to get onto acreage and literally become self-sufficient. But I've got a suburban yard now, like on the Central Coast, and I got this spade. I always bought cheap spades, and they had wooden handles and stuff, and they'd break. And I just have this kind of I got this one it's made out of stainless steel, and it's got a steel handle and stuff. I find it the most beautiful thing. And I've got this really weird relationship to everyone, all my neighbours, because they've all got lawns, and they're always out mowing lawns and got leaf blowers going. And I've done this thing called a food forest. So my whole tiny, but fairly small suburban yard with a little fibre oak cottage on it, and I've got like 80 fruit trees, and everything's covered. It's either like pumpkins or chocos or passion fruit or Jerusalem artichokes or whatever. Everywhere's got something growing in it or on it. So there's all these sort of look like dead lawns to me all up the street that get sort of mowed within an inch of their life. And then there's this bit of jungle. The neighbours I know have walked past and said, "Oh, are you going to clean that up?" I'm going, it's on purpose. It's not like...
So this is brilliant. Your early childhood experience has clearly been played out in your 50s. You used to grow eat your own food, and you're growing and eating your own food.
Yeah, and it's kind of this really weird thing in the pandemic. My son who's only just left home, actually, I think he's so relieved because... Okay, for the next 6 weeks, we'll be eating chocos with every single meal.
The broccoli's in.
Or, whichever. And it was literally, that's what we're having. I get this really weird sense of satisfaction when I get a huge bounty of something. I often get like 40 pumpkins. And then I go, I don't know what I'm going to do with that. My idea of heaven, now is I'm out in the garden with a podcast and my trusty spade, and I'm weeding or I'm putting a new berry bush in or something like that, and I have a couple of really weird exotic fruit trees. I have this one that has that fruit tastes like peanut butter, and I get like one tiny little thing on it, and it is such a thrill for me when I see one little fruit on it.
It's wonderful. It's
a real thrill.
Your body language, everything is lit up talking about gardening. I love it. Now, before I get to my 6 traditional questions, tell me a little bit about. You mentioned your son.
Yeah.
Are you a solo dweller, or you live in a commune, or what's the deal with David?
Well, I'd been a single parent with him for about 6 years before he left home, most of high school, and it was just me and him for a long time. And now it was weird because he's big. He's a lot bigger than me, which is kind of, a lot of people find that hard to believe, but he's a few inches taller than me. Our little fibro cottage just felt so small. And it was kind of like, well, trying to get through, oh, you go, okay, all right. And then he moved out, and now I just feel like I'm rattling around this huge empty mansion, even though it's literally a tiny little cottage, and it just feels so empty. I thought, oh, well, there's not enough space, and now it's just like, I don't need all this space. What's all this for? Yes, it's a very big shift in my life, him moving out. And he only moved out like 2 months ago. It was obviously on the cards at some point, but it was like, oh, okay. Oh, it's just very weird, when you're suddenly by yourself for the first time in decades.
Yeah. It's been just an absolute joy hearing you talk, mate. Thank you. And for respecting the format and coming in and being open and honest. And gosh, I love those holidays at Grandma. The sixth question is: Who would you like to hear on 5 My Life next, and why?
Well, dare I say it, and I don't know if you can get him, but I just think Ben Mendelsohn is such an interesting guy.
Yeah.
We'd be doing something, when we're doing that film we were talking about before, Mullet, we'd be sort of out in this swamp and he'd be gutting mullet. And then he'd sort of between takes, he had this, I don't know, I forget which philosopher it was. He had this huge textbook about Kierkegaard or someone that he was studying, and then he'd have this conversation about this philosopher, and then he'd do this sort of really weird thing where he was doing, at the time, he was this rapper Snoop Dogg, who had these really explicit lyrics, but he used to do this incredible thing where he'd sing it like Noel Coward. and you'd sort of be listening to it and it'd be quite splendid, and you go, hang on a minute, what's he actually saying? And you'd actually work out the actual words he's saying. It was very funny. He's a very interesting chap. Anyway, I think he'd be fantastic.
David Seelert, thank you for sharing your choices on 5 My Life, mate.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to The 5 of My Life, presented by me, Nigel Marsh. Our producer is Mandy Coolan. Theme music is thanks to Darcy Thompson and Matt Nicholish. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please share with a friend. And if there's someone you'd like to hear take the challenge, please message us on the 5 of My Life Instagram page. I love hearing from you and appreciate all your suggestions.